My punks and my skins, up until this very moment in time, absolutely every single previous editorial which we have ever offered to you regarding the political situation in this country and beyond has clearly amounted to one collective waste of breath, which is why we now issue to you one final warning against the dangerous potentialities of the future. Now with this imparted, let's cut the frills and just get right to it, shall we? Even the most atheistic amongst you will have heard of the 10 Commandments. What is a commandment, as you are given to understand? Laws, rules, strict guidelines, mandatory instructions. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. Thou shalt not. These are commandments. Very well. Comparatively, what is an amendment? Well, you mean like in the Constitution? Yeah, like in the Constitution. What is an amendment? Well, again, as you have been given to understand it, amendments are laws, rules, legislative statutes, legalities, but above all, you have the concept that amendments are rights. Amendments are rights guaranteed to you under the Constitution. If this is what you believe, it comes as no surprise. For after all, you've had it drilled into your head over the years. You've been inundated with 100,000 different examples, a myriad of which alone are centered around some jackass who will not shut up because he believes that he has freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want to say. I have freedom of speech. It's my First Amendment right. How many times have you heard that before? And then later, that selfsame idiot, when the only thing that he wants to do is to shut up, what does he do? He pleads the Fifth. I refuse to answer that question based upon my Fifth Amendment right. Again, you've heard this before. 100,000 times before. So many times, in fact, that the words become interchangeable. Right amendment, amendment right. Therefore, an amendment is a right and a right is an amendment. If you believe that an amendment is a right, well then, you are wrong. Well, what then is an amendment? Well, what does it mean to amend something? If you have a pre-existing, previously established construct, and you amend it, all which this means is that you change it. You augment it. You edit it. You reform it. You retract. You redact. You add something to it. You subtract something from it. Do you understand? When you amend something, you alter it. You adjust it. In fact, an amendment could just as interchangeably be called an adjustment. An amendment is an adjustment, and nothing more. That's it. As you may or may not remember, famous or infamous, the Founding Fathers, in those formative years surrounding the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and indeed the Constitution, they had the foresight to know that the framework of the great American experiment might require alteration over the course of the years, and thus they left it open to adaptation by leaving it open-ended. Open to change. It was a wise provision because by the time of the First Continental Congress, they were already rethinking certain aspects of the design. And throughout the course of those formative years, they had occasion at certain intervals to say, just a second, we need to change some of this. We need to trim this. We need to expand upon this. We need to simplify this. We need to streamline this. We need to tweak this. And they did so by adopting amendments. They amended the Constitution. The First Amendment to the Constitution could just as easily, if not more accurately, be called the first adjustment to the Constitution. The first, hey, wait a second, let's try it this way instead of the Constitution. It's true that the amendments showcase, they clarify, they preserve the rights in question, but they are not the rights themselves. The amendments are only adjustments. That is all. Now, all of this should be remedial to you, but in case anyone out there is wondering how this is accomplished, In order to instill and preserve the elasticity and the adjustability of the Constitution, the procedure for an amendment is written right into it. It's built right into the framework, Article 5. But in order to clarify this, in fact, to present this to you in a much more modern context, in order to make this perfectly clear, if enough people are clamoring and complaining and crusading for a change, and they enlist the assistance of enough lobbyists to get out there and campaign for that change, and those lobbyists get the attention of enough policymakers and legislators, if there's enough momentum behind this change, they might just succeed in attaining an amending of the Constitution by way of the establishment of a constitutional amendment. Here is a perfect, beautiful example of this process. By 1920, you had the suffragettes, or the suffragists if you prefer, having been campaigning for the right for women in this country to be able to vote. They finally succeeded in this effort, and they attained the 19th Amendment of the Constitution. And this amendment guarantees women the right to vote. This is just one example throughout the years. You have others. You have the 13th Amendment, wherein slavery was abolished. You have the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed the right for black folks to be able to vote. Then moving on, around about 1919, you have a not-so-good example in the 18th Amendment. You see, you had enough teetotalers, enough pseudo-sober people in this country who insisted that alcohol should not be available, should not be sold, should not be consumed. And so prohibition was introduced in the guise of the 18th Amendment. Now, along about here you might be wondering, what is the point of this little history lesson? Well, that you should ask, because the point is exemplified in yet another amendment, in this case the 21st Amendment. Do you recollect along about 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt showed up and he looked around and he said, "You know what? I think we all could use a drink." And this was accomplished by the introduction of the 21st Amendment, which was used to repeal prohibition, that is to say, to repeal the 18th Amendment. After which, we all cracked a beer and relaxed. Happy days are here again. But do you understand what happened? The 21st Amendment deactivated the 18th Amendment. They amended the First Amendment with a Second Amendment. That is to say, they altered the one alteration with another alteration. They adjusted that first adjustment with a second adjustment. Again you ask, what is the point to reliving all of this ancient history? The fact alone that you view this as ancient history, this reveals the point all too clearly. Because this seems like ancient history to so many people out there, it likewise seems like something which is carved in stone, not unlike those 10 Commandments. Because you have people out there who believe that amendments are rights, when it comes to the Constitution, they dismiss it as some musty, old, half-forgotten, but more to the point, established, solid, concrete bulwark of law. Immutable, unbudgeable, unchangeable. This notion is only further solidified by the fact that there have not been any new amendments, that is to say, new adjustments to the Constitution, in over 50 years. 50 years. Well within the entire span of most of your lifetimes. There have only ever been 27 amendments to the Constitution, going back to the very beginning. Only 27 ever. And the last two were back in 1971 and 1972. One had to do with extending the right to vote to those who were 18 years of age, and the other had to do with the so-called Equal Rights Amendment. Over half a century has passed, during which time there have been no new amendments. Is it any wonder that most of you have never given any thought to this concept? And then almost all of you think of the Constitution as being finite. There are 10 commandments. There are 24 hours in a day. There are 12 signs of the zodiac. There are 3 strikes in an inning. There are 7 deadly sins, 7 days a week, 7 dwarves. And there is an established, set, finite number of constitutional amendments. This is the understanding, this is accepted. And this, at long last, brings us to the point of our little dissertation. The 28th Amendment. Well, wait a minute. What 28th Amendment? Didn't you just say there were only 27? And we just fact-checked you. Yeah, there's only 27 amendments in the Constitution. Are there indeed? Well, in order to address this conundrum, we must refer to yet one more amendment. The 22nd. Remember we were talking about Franklin Roosevelt a few minutes ago? Some of you might recollect. In 1932, he was elected to his first term in office. In 1936, to his second term in office. In 1940, he was elected to his third term in office. In 1944, he was elected to his fourth term in office. If he had not passed away in April of 1945, he would have gone on to serve an entire 16 years in the presidency. And if his health had allowed, and if the public wanted it, and I know pretty much everybody did, if he had lived to 1948, he could have run again and won a 5th term in office. But as you know, he passed away in 1945. And after the dust of World War II settled, enough legislators, enough policymakers got together and they said, we really cannot have this happen again. You see, since the beginning, it was an unwritten rule, a sort of unspoken understanding that, as tradition would dictate, presidents were only expected to have 1 or 2 terms at most. Well, it was never made a fixed law, which is why when Franklin D. Roosevelt came along, these unprecedented 3rd and 4th terms ensued. And so, as I say, they wanted to forestall this ever taking place again, and so they introduced a constitutional amendment, as I say, the 22nd, which, from that point forward, established that any president could only have 2 terms. Do you recall what we only just considered regarding the Prohibition Amendment and then later the Anti-Prohibition Amendment? How the second one basically canceled out the first? It repealed it. It nullified it. It invalidated it. You see, amendments can be used to change the Constitution, but they can also be used to change it back to the way it was before. Hence, if you had, say, hypothetically that is, a phony president who, having already been elected to 2 terms, and who, while serving that second term, decides one day, for whatever reason at all, mind you, that he wants to go on to serve, say, a 3rd term, or a 4th term, or any number of terms. And if he had a great deal of support and approval from the people out there in this country, and he furthermore had a great many special interests lobbying for him, and more to the point, if he had enough legislative support, that is to say, congressional support, if he even had, say, the majority, or more aptly phrased, the monopoly of congressional support, the most that money can buy, all he would have to do is have the idea proposed. And the next thing you know, they would be making a little adjustment to the Constitution, and that 2-term limit would become null and void. And what is more, such a transparently criminal action would be absolutely legal. Legal and legitimately within the provisions of constitutional law, because it would be an amendment. Along about now, a lot of you are saying, I dread the next 4 years. We're in for a terrible 4 years. I wish I could skip the next 4 years. I wonder what it's going to be like 4 years from now. I have warned you about keeping the overall composite, the bigger picture in perspective, the long run. And now I forewarn you not to limit your apprehensions to the next 4 years. There is a much more pressing danger threatening you now, today, this year, next year, 4 years from now, and beyond. The next amendment. And the next of what might be several amendments to the foundational laws of this nation. For now, you just watch and you wait and you listen. You listen for when they start talking about the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the disunited States of America.